Welcome to today's Novage webinar, How to Render Faster and Smarter with V-Ray. Are you ready to revolutionize your rendering game? Join us for an electrifying webinar where we dive deep into the art of rendering faster and smarter with V-Ray. Dave Schultze has curated a powerhouse of topics to supercharge your skills and elevate your creative process. Stick with us. And now let me tell you a little bit about Dave. Dave Schultze is a product designer, architect, and educator, sometimes called a notorious 3D geek. Dave is now sharing training materials on his YouTube channel, Professor3Ddave, and he's also an entrepreneur and founder of Gridopolis Games, an award-winning 3D strategy tabletop game. Check it out. And now a little bit about Novage. Novage is changing the way designers purchase 3D software, offering more choices, more freedom, best advice, faster services with zero headache. Check us out at novage.com, and where you can find the entire V-Ray collection and Enscape, Corona, and all the Chaos product line. And now enough about me. Dave, the stage is all yours. Take it away.
Okay. All right, I got a couple slides too, so I'm going to pop these on here. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Barbara. I really appreciate you and Novage. That's where I go for all my software. And also to Chaos Group, the makers of V-Ray, who are sponsoring this awesome webinar. As Barbara mentioned, I'm Dave. Briefly, I'm an industrial designer, educator, and 3D geek. If you have any follow-up questions or an interest in training or anything, just connect with me at LinkedIn. And Barbara did mention my new YouTube channel, so I'm going to talk about that very briefly. This is brand new. I'm kind of branching out from LinkedIn, where I had a lot of courses. So this is the front page of Professor3Ddave. You're welcome to subscribe, and I'm working on getting stuff up there about once a week, all free. Okay, so let's talk about the goals for today. Why are you rendering? So it's very useful to just think about where's the rendering going? How is it going to be used? And that really helps you focus how you organize everything. So for example, we're going to be looking at these couple of characters here, and they ended up in a presentation for a portfolio. So notice there's a lot of white space around. So this may be a consideration in your rendering. White space is fantastic because it focuses on the design or the character, whatever it is. Typically it's products, tabletop stuff. But it also allows you to put text around it with titles and so forth. So I try to avoid having just little boxes around my renderings. I want them to live on the page, and just having clean white backgrounds is the way to go. That's going to be a big part of what we cover today. And so just a reminder, try to imagine where your rendering is going to be used. Now, they don't always have a place to go. Maybe you're just trying to make it look awesome. But a lot of times in presentations, that is pretty important. Okay, so another thing I'd like to talk about is why do we want to be fast? That's kind of the topic of today. Work faster, work smarter. So I think that you just have an opportunity to make better designs if you keep fixing and refining and tweaking. So in the old days, you might have to wait an hour for a render. I think V-Ray, you're going to be shocked how fast it is and high quality. So you're able to get quicker feedback and make more changes in the same amount of time. So that's cool. I mentioned we're going to be working on small tabletop type stuff. That's going to be the focus, just so we can get through everything on time. But I'm going to briefly jump. We can see the characters on my screen. We'll be working with these guys most of this webinar. But a lot of times I get questions about gear. Dave, what do I buy? So I'll briefly just say the fastest computer you can afford, because rendering is probably the most intensive thing your computer will do. A lot of my students haven't experienced this, and they will tell me, what is that noise? My computer's about to explode. It's like, don't worry, it's just a fan. So the faster you can afford is the better. And also, I recommend having multiple screens. So you'll see why. The V-Ray dialogues interfaces are quite large, and they're going to really just clutter a single screen. So that's it. I'm going to jump now into this little scene. We're going to cover two different studios. So this is kind of my own invention. I've separated the floor and wall. You'll see why. And I've got a couple of lights around the scene. So this little studio, I call it just the glow studio. And it's really cool. So we'll be able to get some reflections on the floor, and then with a clean, perfectly white background, because this backdrop has actually got an emissive material on there. So light is shooting out, and it's really cool the way it looks. Now that doesn't work in all cases, especially if you have something, product that is transparent or very, very light colored, it could disappear. So this is only the second studio that I would need. This is your basic bowl backdrop, but you pretty much can use the same lights, the same everything else. The only thing I added typically on this is a light, just to make sure I can change the intensity of the backdrop. So notice you try to keep the backdrop far away from the characters, so you don't want anything to interfere with that. Or just if you think of like a movie studio, the people in the set are separated, and that also helps for focus, depth of field, lighting, everything. Let's go back to the other studio. Those are the two studios I use pretty much 100% of the time. Okay, let's talk about another thing that's really going to help speed your workflow is kind of the setup, the staging. So I try to get low angle. I think that's going to make stuff more dramatic. You also notice I have 3 characters. So a lot of times you'll have a single product. So I want to talk about that. That can actually be a big challenge. 2 or 3 things have this opportunity to have like a dialogue between each other, and it's automatically way more interesting. So let's turn those guys off. But what if you had 1 character? And so the mistake people will make is they'll just pick a random angle. And in my opinion, he looks kind of lonely. And from high angles, it looks like somebody dropped them and walked away. So here's what I recommend, because most of the time people will render front view, side view, back view. This is one of the simplest tricks you can ever do. I'm going to copy, paste, and then group that guy, and just move the copy over. Oops, did it not copy? It might be a slight delay. Okay, try it again. Copy, paste. Okay, that worked. And I'll group that one. There we go. So now we've got 2 copies. So you'll see where I'm going with this in just a second. Let's move the other character over here. So now we have a much more compelling little setup here. So I got the camera low, we mentioned that. I try to have multiple copies at different angles, and I typically go with a wider angle. So this should be like, 30 millimeters. So just as a reminder, if you don't remember, the camera lens is default to 50. I think that's a little bit of a kind of a medium or neutral. I like to go a little wider angle. So if you have a single object, I always recommend making an extra copy and just kind of copy, paste, group, move, rotate. You're done, and you can throw that away if you don't need it. Okay, later on, it's just for rendering. So that's the 1 object recommendation. Okay, we got 3 though, so we're in much better shape. I'm going to talk about why I've got this stuff in the scene. I got a couple lights. So a lot of times, especially with students, they will put the lights in kind of random weird spots. Notice my lights are pretty close. This will help a lot with having the scene look realistic. So what do I mean by that? Let's go to the side view here. So notice that the characters are about this tall, whatever that dimension is. So about 3 times higher is the light. So really what I want to do is be able to see that the light is washing over the character or the object. That really helps it look more 3-dimensional. So these are all simple things I just keep for every type of rendering. So usually a top light sometimes can be all you need. But if you have a grouping that's 1 guy's blocking the light from the other, I'll put a couple of side lights. But I gotta tell you, this is it. I'd never go crazy with lights. You just use large sources because they will have a lot of light coming out, but they'll tend to be very soft, and you get soft shadows. So just avoid any lights that are way too small because they will be, like the sun is a great example. You have really sharp, crisp shadows, and that can be distracting. Most studio shots will have very soft lighting. So if we look up above on the lighting, the characters have just it's almost like the light's the size of a whole room. So that is the way to go. Okay, so this was actually inspired by Apple products. That's where I'm coming up with this idea. All right, so low angle, multiple dudes, big soft light, and we're in pretty good shape. By the way, another thing that's pretty cool is after you set up your studio floor and the wall in the background and all the lights, you can actually save this as a template. So go to Rhino File, save as template. And so all that geometry can be in your next file that you open up. Okay, so that's the basics of our composition. I'm going to break our workflow into 3 sections. I think that's going to be really helpful. And that can make you more organized and increase the speed quite a bit. So I would say the first part is design. You got to have a model to render, obviously, but make sure you're far enough along that there's details involved. So if you have like a lot of sharp edges, it's not going to look real no matter what. So you want to have fillets on any sharp corners. Characters are a whole different thing. They're pretty soft and they're going to look great no matter what. Yeah, any rounded shape is going to reflect just the best possible way. So that's the design. Lighting is the second thing. And so we're going to do a bunch of cool lighting speed tips and tricks. And then materials are something you can save for the very, very end. Now I've got all my materials on the characters, but I'm going to show you a cool way to erase the materials to speed up rendering even faster. So we covered lighting, but there's another thing that lighting it requires. So if we go to, this is our V-Ray asset editor. Yeah, this is the really big, scary dialogue that kind of made me very nervous the first time I looked at it. So we've got a couple basic panels. Most of the time, you're going to focus here on this center panel, and we can actually close this guy. But for 1 second, I want to show you this quality setting. Will greatly speed up things. So we'll get into that in a minute. We're talking about lighting, and I think it's important to pick a really good background graphic. So let's click on this. So those 3 lights we have in the scene, they're all square rectangular lights. I don't use any spotlights because, again, those are too small, sharp, and they don't really have highlights. But the environment can contribute a lot of light. So it's important you pick a really good graphic. I'm going to show you mine. This is an HDR image. So this just means it has high dynamic range, so there's more color depth than your average JPEG. Now this looks really strange, but it is projected or wrapped onto a sphere. So the reason it has a variety of colors and intensities there, it looks kind of random, swirly, black and white. This is wrapped on a sphere. So if you didn't have a graphic and it was just a solid color, things would look very flat, almost like they were in a fog. So as this wraps around a sphere, try to imagine there's bright areas, there's dark areas, bright areas, then kind of medium areas. So this is your horizon or equator, and the top edge is up at the North Pole. So this is wrapped on the inside of a sphere. You never get to see it. I do have one trick to show you later. Anyway, that is a big part of the lighting. This guy will make the scene look so much more realistic because of the variation. If you just look in your room right now, this is probably the best explanation. You've got light bouncing off of every surface. Yes, it's coming out of the lights directly, but it's bouncing off every surface in the room. Things that are light colored or reflective, more light, but still it's bouncing off everything. So that's what we're simulating right here, just a dynamic environment. Okay, I've got all my lights turned off. Notice I've named them. This will really help you know which is which. Otherwise, we'll just say light 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I've got my top light set at 10, and then the right and left lights. Let's leave those off and just see how this whole set looks right now as is. And then we'll talk about some more settings. We have to do renderings here. So let's go back to V-Ray, Asset Editor, and we can hit this guy here. By the way, sometimes I just click on the, Rhino has a render button too. So you can do it 2 different ways. Let's make sure this is highlighted. A lot more settings to look at, but let's just just kick out one fast rendering, see what we got. You'll notice you do more renderings if you can really speed them up. Okay, so here we're seeing my studio for the first time. Notice we got the kind of night reflections on the floor, but they're a little bit blurry, which is really important. You don't want to have a mirror there, otherwise it looks like two things on top of each other. Also the background. So you're now understanding why I had a separation of the floor and wall. The wall is emitting just a simple white glow. It's an emissive material. Light is shooting out. You never illuminate the scene with this, but it just gives me a super clean background. So by the way, this is all the settings maximized, and I wasn't even counting, but I probably took like 3 seconds. And that's about 2,000 pixels wide. So right off the bat, we're going super fast. This is not very complicated, so that's to be expected. Let's make some changes. Let's make this even better. So remember, this is just of the background light. So move this over. Let's add a top light, rectangular top light. I've got power of 10. That's kind of where I usually start. That's the intensity. So that's something else to mention right here. I want to move this out of the way. That top light, there is 3 different ways to change the amount of light coming out. So we just mentioned intensity, also size, and distance. You change any of those 3, you're going to get a difference of light. So just keep that in mind. A lot of times it looks like nothing happened. So if you move it closer and lower the intensity, it may look the exact same. So there's a lot of things going on. Let's, with that, oops, that one light turned on, I'm going to render the exact same shot. Looks like that, okay. Here we go, small delay. And huge difference right off the bat. So now you would make some adjustments, which you could do with moving the light, changing the intensity, and we're not even using those 2 side lights. So right now we're rendering pretty quick, pretty fast, very nice with just the background environment and that one rectangular light on the top. Okay, let's talk about some of the settings. I skipped over that. So I think I've been using V-Ray since 2005, a long time, and you guys are so lucky because it is it's more powerful, but I think it's one big improvement. It's way easier to use. So I'm going to show you all these settings over here. I told you not to look at, but we're going to look at them just for a second. There's a lot of stuff that I don't even know exactly what happens, and I've spent a lot of time memorizing these. Now I've forgotten, and the reason is quality slider. So this one setting can change like 8 to 12 different things at once. Just look at all those sliders jump around. Notice we're getting good results at low. So I'm going to recommend, there's two ways to speed up your renderings during the early stages. Keep the quality on low and do a smaller render. So if you want to do like a 4,000 pixel wide rendering for your final, just do a 2,000 or 1,000 wide test, just enough to see what's going on. And because I've seen students crank everything to the max, and a lot of times you can't even tell the difference. But you will spend 10 minutes waiting for it to finish when you can probably get the same information in 10 seconds. So that's a really important thing to speed up your workflow. Just keep the quality low and the render size as small as you need. Okay, let's try. There's another really cool tip here. So I only got 3 characters, and they're not too complicated. As you get larger and larger projects, you'll still feel the pain of waiting. So I'm going to introduce something just amazingly cool. There's this setting called material override. I'm just turn that on. What's going on with this guy? And then we can close this over here. It's going to basically say ignore every single material. And there's a lot. We can look at those later. I have a lot of materials in here, maybe 20 materials. Everything's going to be gray. So this can make another huge boost, and it's actually what I recommend for another tip for getting quicker feedback on the shapes and the lights. So we haven't got the materials yet, which is totally fine. So let's try that one change here and see what happens. So this is a little bit of a weird effect, but it is way, way faster, especially if you have a lot of things that are translucent, transparent, or super shiny, because it's not calculating any reflections. Now you're probably saying, yeah, it's that was cool, that was fast, but that environment is just kind of leaving me wanting. So here is something super cool, little tweak to make this even better. So we're going to go to the materials. Here's the list I was talking about. Now I've got the floor and the wall. So those are the two objects I've separated for this effect. So check this out. So every material has this setting, and basically you're telling it, do not override me. So it's an override for the override. So here's the glowing wall, and you can see the settings right here, just white, 1.3 intensity, that's it, that's all I did. Let's turn that off next. So all of the character geometry will stay gray with that one switch, except for the studio set. Okay, so this is still in effect. The override is on, that's off, back on. Let's try it again. I think this, a lot of people will like, because can be very powerful and useful. Now notice here, you can see some of the lights wrapping on the top. And there you go. This is, a lot of times this is fantastic for using as like a progress render, and it's already done. So we've made all the materials that one flat gray and still got the nice environment. So notice we're seeing shadows underneath from our big light, very soft, and a blurry reflection. So that was the floor set to 90% reflectivity. I would recommend staying away from 100%, unless whatever your object is intentionally a mirror. Stuff that's too glossy looks a little bit cheesy and can be confusing. Anything that's 100% polished just reflects so much you can't even tell what you're looking at. I think this is the best possible way, and we call this in the class I teach a neutral form or gray scale rendering. So a lot of times this can be your best rendering because a lot of learners are just not doing a good job on materials. Okay, so that is an amazingly fast way to do it. So if I were to break it down one more time, focus on the design, get it as far along as you can with all the details. Then focus on lighting. And that's what we're doing right now. And the materials come last. So that's your 3 basic steps. Okay, let's talk about some nerdy stuff here for a minute. Let's move this out of the way. So I'm not going to talk about any of the stuff over here except for this section right here. These, if you're not aware, V-Ray uses 2 render engines, one after the other. I believe primary rays is kind of the ambient illumination. That's all the light in the space, and the secondary is more of direct lights where it's coming out of a rectangular light. So it's 2 paths. So and there's options for each of these. So probably you're using different settings. There's 3 options for the first pass, and there's a couple options for the second one, including none. So I just found that these 2 settings are giving me the best quality and speed. So a radiance map, again, this is super technical. I don't even understand how it works, but it's just looking at the scene, calculating a light solution as fast as possible. Brute force is a weird name. It just means there is no optimization happening. It's perfect and it's accurate. So anyway, if I'm indoors for a studio setup, I'm going to use these 2. So that's the only time I'm over here on this panel, because it is a lot of confusing stuff. And I can just dial up the quality. That's the way to go. Let's talk about, since we're on this asset editor, talk about some of the stuff that we can check out. So if you're not aware or you're new, this material editor is now external. So you used to have all the materials here that were installed with the application. Now it's all outside. So this is a little bit weird because you have to have an internet connection to add new materials. This is called the Chaos Material Library. And it's amazing. There's 500 materials here. So you may think, oh, I don't want to have an internet connection. That's a restriction. It's actually a huge benefit because they're adding materials all the time. So anytime you find something you like, you can just click on it. Be sure you can scan around here. There's all these different categories, like plastic. So all these different plastics. Anytime you see one, you're just going to click the download button and it's going to show up inside your scene. So yes, you'd have to have an internet connection and an account, but you've got an amazing library, and these are extremely high quality. So that's, I think, well worth it. So that's relatively new, the last year or two. This is the Cosmos material browser. A lot of times I'll have materials I've used for a while and I like them, but how would you get them into a file? So just a quick tip here, I would open up 2 copies of Rhino. And so the one where it has the material, just pick one piece of geometry that it's assigned to. It could even be a sphere. Copy it. Go to your new file, paste it. You'll see a sphere, but also the material will come in with it. You'll see it right here, and you can throw away the geometry. So that's a great way to move materials from one file to another. Super workflow tip. Okay. Other things you might be aware of. So video cards have gotten way faster, more powerful, and yes, super expensive. So right now I'm just rendering on the CPU, but this setting here, CUDA and RTX are both using the GPU, the graphic processing unit, the video card. Now they're way more powerful than some CPUs. So I don't like to use those. It just, occasionally there's a delay, and I'm doing rendering so fast with all these optimizations, I don't need to, but just be aware, you may want to investigate that if you put a lot of money into your video card. And you can even have the viewport be rendered as well. So there is the V-Ray Interactive as an option on any viewport. But again, there's a delay starting it up and waiting for results. So if you have a fast enough card, definitely test that out. That's well worth mentioning and looking at. Okay, so I want to talk about some new stuff in this, which will speed things up. Let's go ahead now, and I'm going to turn off. Just, whoops, that's the wrong one. Okay, stop it. Yeah, so when you start a rendering, you see a little red square. So if you hit it really quickly, that's like a stop. So the same thing that you start, you can use to stop. So that happens a lot when I make little mistakes like I just did. But there's a whole bunch of settings that I'd like to point out in the frame buffer. So this is our render thing here. So let's open it up. So this will happen a lot of times. You get a glitch and you don't want to look at that. You just want a fresh render. So what you can do is hit this. This just clears the whole buffer or frame. So the next one will come in right there. Okay, I want to turn off my material override. That's where I was going with this. That is off. Now we should have full color. Let's do another rendering here, and we'll talk about some of these really powerful ways to speed things up. Okay, just hit a render here. Just want to make sure my viewport is selected. That's like the #1 mistake I've been making. I've got the top view or the side view, and I'm rendering. Okay, so I've started to render. This will take a little bit longer than the gray guys, having the material override. So pretty quick. Another thing I'm going to recommend, everyone's familiar with the save. Yes. We've also got a follow section and a region render. These are another great way to speed things up. So let's say I made some changes on the rabbit, right? I made him different eyes, different nose. So you can just draw a box around an area that got changed. This is so cool. And then re-render that. And only that section gets re-rendered. So I don't know if it's already, oh, there it goes. This is a huge time saver if only one thing in the whole scene is getting updated. So that's called region render. Okay, let's turn that back off. It's a nice little toggle. And I'm going to clear this to highlight the next thing, clear all channels. And I'm going to use the next little speed boost, dude, is the follow mouse. So when I start the next render, I'm just going to leave my mouse here in the middle. It's going to go exactly where I'm pointing. Look at that. So if I go over here, it focuses wherever I'm pointing. So a lot of times you don't even have to have let the render finish. This is a big deal as you get more and more complicated scenes that take longer and longer to render. So use these two guys here. So you can tell right now it's focusing where my mouse is. I don't know if you can see that. You did it first. So that's I really love that. So I mentioned stop render. Let's talk about some of the other settings here. I'm going to be going outside V-Ray in just a little while. So we're going to be using alpha channels. So this alpha channel shows you, it separates the foreground and background. Now we don't have any background visible because we've got a floor and we got a wall. So I'm going to be working on that in just a minute. The alpha channel is going to be important because we want to put our render maybe into a different scene. So the use of the alpha channel can be very powerful. You may not have the time or energy to set up these characters in the exact right environment. So I'm going to show you an example where we have like a gradient background. It can take a while to get that to look right. And if you move the camera, maybe it's not correct. So I'm going to do a couple of things in Photoshop coming up next. Okay, so let's do another render. I'm going to let this one finish this time and talk about depth of field, which is something that really takes a lot longer. So we're going to jump to this 3D game. And let's see. So here's kind of a low angle shot. Let's just do a quick render. We got the low quality, which is going to be great. And I've got background on. I think I've got the same lights. Just to mix this up, let's switch the studios. So I'm going to go turn off the glow back wall and the floor and go to the bowl. So let's just say these, this material was so light colored, it was disappearing into the white backdrop. So now we've got just kind of a flat gray bowl. And this will be our second little studio to discuss. Let's render and see what we got. Make sure it's active. Here's the render button. Oh, I still got the mouse thing on there. Turn that off. Okay, it definitely looks like it's fading into the background. Is it done? And it's done, so that's pretty quick. So some things I want to point out here, little hacks or techniques, is we can throw lights in the scene. So I ran into issues when I had a lot of stuff cluttering the scene. I don't want to say the word clutter, but objects would block light from other objects. So what I've done in the past is just put little small rectangular lights inside the model. If you can think, if we're doing like a vehicle or aircraft, you could put a light inside the car or inside the appliance. Let's say it's a stove or oven. So it doesn't appear so dark underneath. And you can notice this looks fine up here. It's getting darker here and it's much darker down below. So let's just do a quick little tweak on that. So we'll go to V-Ray, lights, rectangular light. I'm gonna draw it off to the side here because it's gonna take a little bit of moving. So there's the light. And I'm gonna bring that up and just put it in the middle. Looks like it's upside down, so we'll flip it over. Let's check the settings. Yeah, there's the light. I probably want to scale that down a bit. It doesn't need to be too big. Okay, so there's one light, and you can copy and paste and make more. Let's just leave one in there. Let's check its settings. So this should be our new light. Yeah, it came in with a really high value of 60. So this is something new with V-Ray. It will, I think, starts off at 30 or 40 or 50. And if you scale it up or down, the numbers actually change. You got to be careful that you come check these out. Now it's much smaller than the other lights, so we have to maybe intensify it. Let's maybe start it with 25. So that's all I'm trying to communicate here is This little filler light is just solving an issue when things get blocked. So this will happen on, professional photographers will have little tiny lights filling things in if they're too dark. Okay, let's render that again. So we've got a situation here. The light is showing up. So I don't know if you guys are aware of this. The other lights have been hidden from the camera. They still are throwing light into the scene. But you can see this looks way more interesting and dramatic down there. It's not getting incrementally darker. Okay, so let's show, highlight where we fix that. So I've got this, I might want to call it the small fill. This is really important to name your stuff. Small fill, go down to options and make it invisible. It's so easy, just right in there, invisible to the camera. It's probably a little too bright, which I noticed, so let's make an adjustment to that as well. I'm gonna dial it in as fast as possible and let's render it. Really cool way to fill stuff in without torturing yourself, because in the past, I might have moved the lights around, up and down, back and forth, when you don't have to. Just leave the main lights where they are and just do a couple small filler lights whenever they're needed. If there's like some stuff getting blocked, and just make them invisible. So that's a really cool way to do it. Okay, we're in this frame buffer. There's a lot of tools here. I just want to focus on one. We looked at some of the speed features here at the top, but this is the big one. If you're familiar with the curves in Photoshop, this works identical, and it can save you a ton of time. So the background here is V-Ray's rendering in what's called high dynamic range, which just means there's way more color than the 255 values of RG&D, right? There's tens of 20, 100,000 values. Your monitor can't show that. So your rendering may look a little flat, but that's actually accurate. V-Ray is working with your monitor to show you kind of the mid-range of the rendering. There's stuff that's brighter and stuff that's darker that just doesn't show up. That's why the curve correction can take those other values and kind of bring them into the space where the monitor can see it. So I'm going to make the brights a little bit brighter. So it's an S curve. So I'm going to make the darks a little darker. Let's jump that. By the way, if it jumps somewhere, there we go. The dark's darker, just pull it down. So typically these will go just a couple squares to either side, okay? So this can make a huge difference in stuff popping without rendering so many more times. So if we just turn that off, you can see it looks flat. Turn it back on. So this can actually save you a lot of render tests just by doing that. Okay, I'm gonna go back to a different scene. The challenge here is this background is continuous. Just one final reminder. This can only be a matte color. If you try to throw something reflective onto your bowl studio, which we're in now, you're gonna get some weird reflections in this curve as it goes up the wall. So I just tend to keep it kind of maybe 50% reflective at most, which is very neutral. If you get up to 80 or 90% like we had with the white floor, then you're gonna see weird reflections in that curve. So there's no way around it. All right, so we're gonna fix a couple things and jump into Photoshop. So I'm gonna turn off the bowl and we'll go back with the glow wall and floor. I'm gonna leave everything else pretty similar. I do wanna, before we get into Photoshop, talk about the depth of field, which is a really powerful way to make things look more realistic. This is towards the end of the project in general. I'm gonna go over here. This is another one of our scary settings. So we go to camera, and right now everything is in perfect sharpness. So depth of field can be turned on. Let's try, we'll probably just do it once and then you'll see why. It really slows things down. This number is really tricky, defocusing. If I go above 0.3, it becomes really noticeable. I don't know why they picked that number, but let's go 0.35. That'll be very noticeable. Now, where is it focusing? This is such a cool feature that you may not know. You have to pick a distance, but you don't have to do any calculations. Instead, I'm just going to pick here a point. I'm going to pick the front edge. Actually, we'll pick one of these parts here towards the camera. That's going to be in focus. Anything forward or behind will be more and more out of focus. Okay, I think that's going to be enough to give us a result. Let's try it. So I'm going to show you how to do it in V-Ray and then how to do it in Photoshop. So there's a couple of ways to do this. It's up to you, and there's always like a time trade-off. So let's render that scene. And so I cranked it up so it was really obvious, and you can see these guys right here. This can make a big difference. Look at that. These guys are in super sharp focus, and you can see as you get further away, it's almost like a sphere or focal plane. Stuff is just kind of blurred out of focus. So unfortunately, you're kind of stuck. I have picked the position, and I can't really make stuff unsharp or bring it back. So I'm going to show you now how you might want to make some tweaks in Photoshop. Okay, again, we got the curve, making some nice adjustments. I think with the white background, we don't have to do as much, so I can kind of lower that down. By the way, if you get this thing off axis, which is really easy to do, you can just right click and reset it. And here is your profile. It means no change to the highlights or the dark parts. And you can just click on each endpoint and pull it down. That's how you get it back. So with the white background. Okay, so we're gonna do some compositing in Photoshop, and this will greatly speed things up as well. So I'm gonna close this. Now, we don't have any ability to put a new background in there. So I'm gonna pick this backdrop. This is our glow wall. Sorry, it's locked. Here we go. This is a smart way to put your studio, is put all in a layer, and you're not accidentally moving things around. I'll tell you what, let's jump over to the characters. That might work just as well. Those would be more fun to look at too. So I'm gonna close the game, go back to 3 characters, and then I've got low angle, and I'm gonna get rid of this light here, which we had for the set. Okay, so we're gonna render this, and we're gonna bring it into Photoshop, and we're gonna replace the background. Let's say we want a gradient. So we've got this element here, and it is blocking our alpha channel, our ability to take the background off. So let me show you how we fix that. Let's go to the asset editor, and we're gonna go to materials, and that is the glowing wall. So we're just gonna say invisible to camera. So here we are, it's under ray trace properties. By the way, if that's not visible, you may have to add the ray trace properties through there. It's a separate layer. So turn that off. Now it's still gonna give a nice gentle glow around some of the objects. It's in the scene, but the camera is gonna make it invisible. Is everyone clear on that? Okay, I'm gonna bump up the quality just a little bit. And I'm gonna turn off the depth of field. We're gonna do depth of field in Photoshop. So everything's gonna be nice and sharp, no background. Can everyone visualize? I think we're set. All right, how big is it? Let's go output. They'll be good. So we're 1 step up in quality, and we're 2,000 pixels wide. That should be plenty. We don't wanna be here all day. And I'll render that guy. Viewport selected. Go. So if this works, we're going to be able to save this with just the characters and the floor. Now what we're seeing here is that background, the graphic we looked at the very beginning of the webinar. So, we can double check before we get into Photoshop. Click here. Boom, we have no background. This is your mask or alpha channel. Okay, it's probably cranked up a little too much. Got a lot of light in the scene. So whenever you're ready, we're gonna save this. I like the reflections, but we're going to change the background and we're going to do some depth of field as well. So a lot of stuff can be handled in Photoshop. So let's save this. I'm going to call this webinar 02. I like to keep things organized. I believe that was a PNG, by the way. If you're not aware, do not save your images as a JPEG. JPEG does not know what an alpha channel or background mask is, so it just won't work. All right, let's open this guy in Photoshop. Here's the last test I did. Let's open it up. Okay, check this out. So if I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Photoshop, and there's the transparency. It's really cool. So what I typically do is make a new layer. Let's call this the background. There we go. Put that underneath the layer. We want to have the ability to change it. That's why we're in Photoshop here. So we're going to do a simple gradient. Now, if I did my job correctly, the edge of this floor should be perfectly white. And so that's easy to match. So we'll do a gradient from foreground to background. Looks like it's working there. Okay, so I believe foreground is first. So we're going to start perfectly white. Boom, we go up to black, or I think it's actually a gray. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Anyway, this is really nice. You can just pop a new background in any time. Looks like we got a little bit of a line here. I might come back later, another day, not right now, and erase that. So think of all the ways you can control backgrounds just by going to Photoshop. And I could have, if I had done the same thing to the floor, I could put these guys in a completely different scene. So that's something I do a lot. I'm noticing these guys now in the current background, they look a little bit bright. So I can just use the curves in Photoshop. This is where most people learn this. So that's brighter. Leave that alone and just maybe darken up some stuff. Okay, so I always have that option to keep tweaking. You can do it in V-Ray, you can do it in Photoshop. Now, I also said we're going to adjust the depth of field. So this is another way to speed things up, especially when you get really huge files. So I might want to make a copy of this. So let's duplicate the layer. Duplicate, copy, and then I can always go back. So what I want to do is kind of simulate how we did depth of field, but I can always go back if I don't like it. So a great way to do this is pretend the cow is the foreground object. I'm going to just draw a really loose lasso around the rabbit. And we're going to do a quick, make sure I'm on the right layer there. Get a filter, blur, Gaussian blur. If you guys have worked in Photoshop any amount of time, you know this command. So that's 1 pixel. So this is really cool. You can just make them slightly out of focus, depending on what your effect is. If you want to focus on the cow, you can make other objects in a scene just a tiny bit out of focus, not much. So I'm just going to say 2 pixels here. Okay, and then deselect, and you would just do the same thing with any other character. So, and in fact, if you go Gaussian blur, it's just going to apply the same exact amount. There you go. So those can be turned off and brought back. Really cool way to do it. So we've replaced the background and we've replaced or made more depth of field. I'm looking at the time here. I just want to show you guys one more random super nerd tip. Do we have time, Barbara? Any questions piling up?
Sure. There's no question yet, so we have a little time, and then.
This is a lot of stuff, everybody. So thanks for letting me talk really fast. Let's go back. That's kind of the highlights with Photoshop. Let's go back into Rhino and V-Ray. And I want to share with you a troubleshooting tip. This happens a lot, even to me, but especially with beginners. Stuff, it just looks completely weird and you're not sure. There's so many settings. You know, where do you go? How do you fix it? So I invented this crazy thing. It's called my render buddy. So he's pretty simple. Basically, he is just a little sphere, just a sphere. Whoops, not too big. There we go. I'm gonna put him kind of close towards the camera. There we go. And for him to work his magic, I'm gonna have to put a mirror on this guy. You'll hang on, you'll see why in a minute. So let's go to the asset editor, and I'm gonna see if I have any chrome materials. Yes, I do, polished chrome. I can just apply that to the object. Now I've got a ball mirror, okay? What am I doing? Let's render it and talk about it. I think our background is invisible. Let's bring that back. So let's go to materials, glowing wall. Yeah, let's make it visible. I think that'd just be more interesting here. Okay, let's render that. Coming up, I think we're increased the quality, so it might take a little bit longer. There's our render buddy. So what's happening is he is a perfect mirror. He's looking everywhere. He's telling you what the background is and where every light in the scene is. You can see the top light is the brightest, but you can see our other two side lights. I have found that I had like copies of lights I wasn't even aware of because they were so high up in the sky, I didn't even notice. So if you get stuck in a situation like that, make a ball, chrome, render, and see if there's something unexpected in your scene that could be throwing off the color, render, or whatever. Okay, one more random. Any more time for random?
Sure.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, there's a setting that a lot of people don't notice unless it's causing issues. And let's zoom in here to this. This might be a good place to show it. So as you get closer and closer, you might see jagged lines on this. It has like straight sections. It all depends on your settings on your computer. So that can happen and kind of spoil a lot of smooth organic surfaces. So well, I guess my point is there is settings for what's called the display mesh. So yes, your character is infinitely smooth, but it's only going to render a rough approximation in the viewport. That's called the viewport mesh. So what I'm going to do is highlight just the sphere, and we have render mesh settings under properties, and we're going to customize it a bit. Notice that it's only like 65% accurate. That just means it may have sharp, jagged edges. So what I typically do is just crank it up to 100%. Let's see if we go simple controls. Just crank that to the max. Crank that. If it's going to show up and it's supposed to be smooth, make it maximum smooth, and you'll never see those jaggies again. Okay. Now you have to do that for every object that is important to you. So I can pick all these characters. Looks like I have to do them one at a time. There's my sub D surface. Oh, I got to make custom mesh, then adjust, and just simple controls, crank it up. Only if you see an issue. Most of the time, half the time, whatever, it'll be fine. But if you get close and you see little jaggies and wondering what's going on, it's just the display mesh. So that's kind of Rhino giving you a rough approximation, because if you have a lot of stuff on the scene, you just won't be able to move around smoothly and cleanly like this. It'll start jerking. So it's always being simplified. That's all that's going on. So anything critical, customize it, hit the adjust button, and just crank it to maximum smoothness. So you won't see any jaggy lines on that. That looks just like super smooth. All right. If we have questions, we can answer them. Otherwise, we're just about out of time.
Dave, we have one question.
Yes.
Beside a lot of great feedback and everybody thanking you for the great insight and the very great tips. So, hello, Dave. Could you please provide some samples of exterior architectural renderings? Also, I'm curious to know if you typically use just 1 or 2 preset scenes for architectural visualization too.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've purposely stuck to interior studios because architecture is a whole other way to do stuff, and you're going to be using sunlight for sure. So if we go to the asset editor, you'll notice we go to lights. the sun is turned off, that will blast away pretty much any tabletop set, unless you lower the intensity or you like razor sharp shadows. I just tend to go what photographers like, which is large, soft, diffused light. So no, I don't have any scenes right now to show. So that's to answer your question. I've specifically focused on tabletop product with the game and the characters. Yeah, you're going to be outside. Yeah, you're going to be outside. You're going to be using the sun. There's lots of cool atmospheric effects. You'll absolutely have depth of field because there's so much depth to the scene. And yeah, you probably want to have a lot of what's called entourage, a lot of people, a lot of trees, a lot of cars. Those are very challenging until you kind of get a good workflow.
Thank you so much, Dave. I'm just, there's no other question, but, you know, again, compliments, excellent presentation, great insight. And also somebody's asking, somebody joined late asking if this is going to be recorded. Yes, this webinar is currently being recorded. It will be uploaded on the Noveg YouTube channel. Just search for Noveg on YouTube and the webinar will be there as, you know, probably in a couple of hours. And
Nice.
yes, this is your chance. If you have any question, speak now or type now. Dave, I didn't know you were a V-Ray veteran. So you started using V-Ray, you said in
Yes.
2005?
Yeah, I was at the forum recently, and I just happened to be updating my profile, and it said member since 2005.
Were you in kindergarten back then? Yeah. You
No,
were
no.
child prodigy using V-Ray.
No, I am older than I look, I will say. Nothing more. Yeah, I started using Rhino when I was at Art Center getting my master's degree of product design. And at the time, there was Alias, and it was so expensive that
Yeah.
all I could, yeah, it was like $100,000 for the computer hardware and software. So Rhino came out in beta, and I just jumped all over it, and that's why I just loved it so much because, yeah, it ultimately got to up where Alias was a few years later, but I could tell right away it was very powerful. And then to complement V-Ray, these guys, there's nothing better. There is nothing better than V-Ray. It's best of breed. I know they're used in a lot of sci-fi movies, which are very demanding.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah,
Yeah.
V-Ray is used. I've seen it in a lot of my favorite sci-fi movies. I would say I was self-taught at the beginning, which took forever. And I got to tell them, compliment them, because V-Ray is now so much more faster and powerful, yes, but they've also done a great job making it so much more clean and intuitive to use. So you'll notice there was a bunch of stuff we didn't look at on that interface, and that was on purpose because you can do some great work like this with hardly touching a lot of settings, especially that quality setting. That was a game changer for me. There was so many things I had to change manually, but when they introduced quality a couple versions ago, that really helped a lot.
Yeah, V-Ray's come a long way, I will say. Dave, another request. There's a demo interested in purchasing some of these scenes. Do you have any preset architectural scenes available for sale? This is something
I've never thought about it, but yeah, connect with
I'll
me.
put you two in touch. Yes.
Yeah, connect with me,
you'll
and
hear from
I'll see what
Dave.
we can do.
Okay. And that's pretty much it. Thank you so much, Dave. These characters, by the way, are adorable. And so sad to take them away from you. I'm just showing our page on the Noveg catalog where you can purchase V-Ray. Of course, we have the entire Chaos Group line. We have V-Ray, we have Chaos Vantage, we have Enscape, we have Corona, and we have Rhino. So Noveg ED is the one-stop shop for design software. Thanks again for joining us today. Thank you so much, Dave. This was insightful, illuminating, no pun intended, and I'm sure
Nice.
the people, V-Ray users, are going to appreciate your tips. Have a great rest of the day, everybody, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
See ya.